Well, I think we'll get started there. So a huge welcome to everyone joining us this afternoon. Thank you for signing up to the webinar and submitting all your questions. My name is Jack Harvard-Taylor. I'm the marketing manager at Threepipe Reply, brand performance agency. And we're very pleased to be joined by Seb Anthony, Head of Growth at Trussle, the UK's first online mortgage broker, and my colleague Jessica Shanks, Threepipe's strategic lead for PR. So in terms of running order today, we're going to kick off with Seb and Jess sharing a few tricks on building effective digital PR strategies to improve reputation and visibility. So as we go through, I'm sure there'll be questions that come up. Please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible after the sort of main presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jess and Seb, and we'll get into Q&A straight after. Over to you guys.
Cool. So just a quick introduction. I'm Sebastian. I am the Head of Growth at Trussle, but my background is in technology way back, the original .com bubble. I was an engineer, an SEO. Then I became a journalist for a long time, and then I came back to the growth side of things. So I've seen a lot of internet stuff along the way.
Thanks, Seb. Seb and I work really closely. My name is Jess. I'm the PR strategic lead at Threepipe. I have a lot of agency experience working on big brands, small brands, and everything in between. But fundamentally, what I love to do is find facts and create stories. I am unashamed to say I'm a massive geek. But yes, thank you for being here. Seb and I work closely, as Seb is one of my clients, and that's why we thought that it would be interesting to put a webinar together where we talk about what we do. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm hoping it's going to be seamless. Bear with me 1 second. It's obviously not. Yep. Okay, just moving faces. Sorry, everyone. Okay. There we go. So all of you should be able to see Seb. Can I just have a thumb that we have got the screen on there? I think that we do.
We're seeing your notes as well. I don't know if you want to share the notes.
Oh.
Yes, I think we've got your presenter notes up.
Oh.
Stick to this one.
Yeah, 1 second. I can fix this.
Quick fix. There's always going to be some tech issues, minor tech issues, I should say. Bear with us.
That's just a lovely picture for everyone that they didn't want to see, but there we go. You should now be able to see full screen presentation. Is that okay? Right, that was clammy. Let's crack on. So, what are we here to do? So we're here to discuss digital PR, why it's important, what strategies are working in 2021, how important it is, how we're measuring it, and fundamentally why it's interesting and the importance of an agency and client collaboration in this digital PR space. So what is digital PR? So this is probably something I would have looked like when I was younger. Sometimes I feel the same about digital PR. The key thing is that digital PR for us is the answer to lots of current issues that we have. So what are they? We've all witnessed the following questions of dread if you sit PR agency side. Seb may have even asked me a few of them, but fundamentally we're on the same team. And these are our list of questions of dread. So firstly, what is the actual impact of PR? I know that many of you will have been asked this question, and you can roundabout say that traditional PR is very much around awareness, but bringing the two together and creating a digital PR press office means there are tangible results which you can really demonstrate internally and externally. My last agency guaranteed sales. Now, this is another one that we regularly stumble through. The key thing that sometimes we try and position, and actually one route I wouldn't take in terms of answering this question is, they're your last agency. that's not necessarily that helpful to that conversation and can in fact take yourselves down quite a negative skew. But the key thing is making sure that your platform and the way that you use your press office really taps into their overall marketing work, and it means that you can help them to guarantee sales, but no, we won't be able to tie X number of sales to X article. Why choose PR over a paid channel? Now, this is really difficult, and I myself work at an integrated agency, which means that quite often we come up against this question, and fundamentally we do use paid channels as well as non-paid channels, but the key thing is making sure that your channel can integrate together. Last year this worked, why don't we try that? And Seb and I have the kind of beauty, if you could say, that we've only ever worked together in a pandemic. I myself have worked with Seb for quite a long time now, but only actually met him in the pitch. But I just wanted to kind of touch on the fact that last year that may have worked. We were pre-pandemic. Let's crack on with what works in the pandemic, and that's why we're here today.
Yeah, and on that one, it's funny, before we had Threepipe as an agency, we had another agency, and our relationship was very, very, very different pre-pandemic. It was much more traditional PR, and that kind of worked at the time. But then as we came into the pandemic, we saw that it just wasn't having the same kind of cut through. And so like it really was time to find another agency, and digital PR was the answer for us at the time.
And finally, the clangor that I'm sure some of you will have heard, in a sense of, I saw this link in Mail Online with Kim Kardashian. It was a simple list. Can we do that? That's something that we come up against a lot, not necessarily with our more serious brands that are really helping consumers, but more with our kind of wider consumer brands that really do look at those quick PR stories. And no, we don't need Kim Kardashian in everything. I know that many people love her, many people hate her. That's probably why there are links with her in it. But the key thing for us is making sure that we create campaigns that don't need celebrities to land those links, because you're not going to have them in everything. But none of those grudges are why we're here. So go on to the next one. What's the solution? So we need to work in a world where we measure both the actual and the knock-on effect. We need to have a metric that can be easily shared and understood at a C-suite level. So digital PR creates metrics that you can say in a sentence, this is what I'm doing, this is why it's important to your business, and this is why we should continue to use it. But we need to measure that longevity piece. Pan flashes are lucky, but they're also really unpredictable. So making sure that you can build campaigns that can flip over and over and over and land throughout is really important and a core focus for us.
Your second point is another great thing with digital PR for us, is that with our previous setup with traditional PR, we had the classic, so when I report to the C-suite, there's the classic, okay, so you've got lots of press mentions, but like what's that actually driving for the business? But as we move more towards digital PR, we can talk more about links and domain authority and search ranking. So like actual metrics that the C-suite is happier with.
Yeah. So to us, the solution is making sure that you still have a press office, but it's a digital press office, which makes sure that you have that flow from reactive comms that are and will continue to be incredibly important, but they'll go through to influencers, whether they're trade influencers, your own CEO, or a consumer influencer. And then you also place those links, probably in a more campaign specific way, but making sure that those campaigns span a wider time to make sure that you have that sustained coverage. So why is this important? Well, in a nutshell, it's a nuclear press office. That sounds quite snazzy, but essentially it's quite small, quite functional, and loads of people within it that can get their hands dirty and throw themselves into everything. It's also level agnostic. So I myself lead the team, but I'm also on news in the morning once a week. So making sure that you do have a small, really effective team that's ready to get their hands dirty and create tangible results. This is why. So digital PR uses traditional PR tactics. We know what PR is. We're not saying it's going anywhere. It's more that it has evolved. It means that you can get those links into those websites in a more authentic and natural way. It's clear, it's definable, and it means that SEO people and digital people can communicate together and get rid of the land grab. It means that we can make sure that we are having comms that are effective and impactful too. But having links and authentic editorial coverage means that you're a credible expert in your field, both in a sense of you can say stuff, it's valid, but also you appear in search, which means that you're more likely to be included in these big news roundups. To put it simply, we are drawing consumers back to your website, and that will have a significant commercial impact. answering the dreaded PR question of how many sales am I getting from this particular thing? So what strategies are working? Now, I know that everyone on this call has been through and is going through the pandemic. I'm not going to hammer on about it, but the key thing to remember is that the main strategy that works with digital PR is that a story has to be a story. It can't be a simple brand function. Secondly, you need a gap in the news agenda or a space that your competitor hasn't spotted. So that doesn't just mean saying, oh, Matt Hancock hasn't done something wrong today, let's go out with a story. It's more making sure that you see the gaps where your competitors aren't playing and place those stories in those gaps. So it's quite strategic. It's like next level PR stalking. And as a PR person, I know I'm a stalker. I don't do it in my social life, but professionally, quite good at it, and I'll continue to do more of it. But the idea, oh, sorry, Seb, to be tripping in.
It's similar to, again, how we used to do things where we were more focused on trying to tell our story, like irrespective of what the PR and the news kind of cycle was trying to say. And we just kept hammering the story that wasn't really a story, and it never really got pickup. And so we pivoted with digital PR to stories that work for us and for the news cycle. And like the different, we'll get into it a bit later, but like the difference really was massive when we started doing this.
Yeah, completely. And essentially, as just to round up what Seb said, it's bigger than that. So we can't PR an advert. It simply doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We've told many ad agencies it doesn't work and created lots of tense conversations, but we have to continue that thinking through into our strategy. External data is really, really important. And no, we're not saying go to your clients and say, hey, I'd like to do yet another piece of research. It costs this much money. Yes, research is valid and we still do it and would continue to advocate it. But it's more thinking about building in research pieces, perhaps halfway through the year, which batch lots of stats together. And the second part of it is making sure that you do know what else is out there. So yet today there was a story from Halifax. It was really good. It's everywhere. It used Bank of England stats. They very much use those external stats and then create a commentary off the back of it. That kind of thing is still really useful. The other thing to remember is that brands really are collaborating more than they ever have done. And we're happy to share our stats with other brands, and other brands can share our stats too. So making sure that you do weave those other stats in is really important. Firstly, because it's easy and you can make sure that you get those stats in quickly and cost effectively. But secondly, it's demonstrating to those editors that this is a searchable thing. It's important to your audience. Other brands are talking about it. Let's combine it. Let's use those keywords in our pitches to make sure that we do say to them that if you write this story, it's not just going to be interesting to your consumers, but it's also going to make sure that you link through to those stories that are trending, bringing your own page rank up, kind of playing the game back at them.
Another, just one SEO point, Jess, is that, so if there are any SEOs on the call, using data in your content is an age-old strategy for driving up page ranking, driving up backlinks, driving up authority. And so this is kind of a double-edged sword that if you craft stories that involve data, they tend to attract more links over time. Like the content will be better on your site, the content will be better on the journalist site, and data tends to get more backlinks than just a straight content-y story.
Yeah, completely. And the other thing to remember as well is that it's not just national news outlets and big guys that really like this information. It's also those regional titles. And we never forget and will continue to try and be even better friends with regional titles because they really are catalyst sites. We know that it used to be brands like CNET, and by catalyst, I mean get a piece here and it goes everywhere because they use all the content on that site in their respective sites. So regional titles to us are really important. They also love stats, particularly regionalized ones. And the other thing, as I've said before, your campaign needs to flip. We usually have 3 releases per campaign, and I'll come on to an example of one particularly sweaty morning where we had to flip a campaign at 6 a.m. So the next thing to remember is that tools are really important. And by tools, I mean calculators, maps, lists, everything you name it. You type in something and it spits something out and it lives on your client's site. Now, dynamic tools, and by dynamic, I mean tools that you can personalize, far outperform static displays. But that said, if you do have something really interesting to say and you can package it up in a unique way which has your brand propositioning directly next to it, it's worth a consideration. But for us, we always like to go after a dynamic tool if possible. The example we'll take you through is a remortgage calculator, which we did when finances were really stretched at the beginning. But in a typical PR way, I thought I would bring this together with a little anagram. And I know this is quite nerdy, but a lot of teams out there and on this will need to share learnings from this webinar, I hope. One key thing that we teach our team is that a tool has to be useful. So it's useful as in, will people actually care, will they use it? It's specific, as in it's a specific problem. You're not going to boil the ocean with a match. You need to remember that it's one specific thing to help an audience and really make your story sing, and exciting. If possible, try and make things exciting. Now, I know as a PR, some of the things I say that are exciting probably aren't that exciting, but if you can try and make it in some ways exciting, it's more likely that the journalist will use it. So there you go, guys. That's for you. So I'm going to quickly take you through an example that Seb and I worked on. I'm going to set it up and then Seb's going to run through the tool itself. So we've explained who Trussle are. We started working with them right at the beginning of the pandemic. We won the account pre-COVID, and then the COVID escalated quite quickly, which meant that we've never worked together, not inside a pandemic. The key thing that we did at the beginning was really cement our press office, because we knew that they needed to have brand visibility while the property market was shut. That was quite difficult to do, but we also knew that they could really help people with their remortgage, could unlock finance and make sure that that really difficult conversation around monthly bills was slightly easier. So we made sure that we did this. We got 3 broadcast opportunities and achieved 90 pieces of coverage within the first few months. So we then looked at a particular gap in the market around remortgage. The whole brand shifted towards a remortgage focus because obviously exchanging and the whole property chain was frozen at that time. We looked at new homes, but then we made sure that we flipped it round and looked at remortgage. We went to go live with the story at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday because the news agenda was insane then. One of our competitors, who I won't mention, went live with exactly the same campaign, pulled the campaign, meant that we had to then pause and rethink, which for digital PR is a key thing. If it's not going to fly, pause, adapt, go back out again. We went back out again a week later with a new campaign. It landed 130 links with DA 40+, quadrupling our target, and ranked us way up to number 2 on Google. So I'll just hand to Seb to run through the tool.
So we were actually number 1 for a while. So we're now number 2. So this calculator, pretty straightforward from the Trussle side. We're a mortgage broker. We want people to come and remortgage with us. So obviously we want, when someone Googles remortgage or remortgage calculator, we want Trussle to be at the top. We know that great content and great tools, Google already prefers these things, right? So if you have good content on remortgaging and you have a good calculator for remortgaging, you've already done a lot of the work. The final piece is you need backlinks, right? So you need, say, number 1 on Google currently has 50 backlinks. It's a calculator at Halifax or something like that. If I can get 60 backlinks, this is a very rough example, but if I can get 60 backlinks, I have a good chance of being number 1, right? So what do? We build a calculator that we think can get backlinks. So we looked at the situation, we thought, okay, what can you do with a remortgage? You can save money, and then what can you do with that money that you save? And can we tie these things into the pandemic in some way? So this is like, March, April last year, and people would have you're working from home, you've got your kids running around the house, your garden is tiny, and like you have no car to get out of the countryside, get to the countryside. And so all of these checkboxes in the bottom left-hand corner pop up a message saying what you can spend your remortgage money on. So you can spend it on a zip car, you can spend it on online tuition for your children, and just simple things, right? We built this with the product team at Trussle. So I worked with Threepipe to kind of get the PR requirements, like what will work well in the media. And then I worked with the product team to actually build this calculator. And that was it, really. We launched it. As Jess said, we had to think on our feet pretty quickly when actually selling in the campaign, but it worked really, really, really well. And the calculator is still number 2, I think, if you Google remortgage calculator. And for someone like Trussle, who, we're competing with massive price comparison websites like Money Saving Expert. We're competing with the banks. So for us to be number 2 is a huge success for something like this.
Yeah, so that was an exciting example. Thank you, Seb. I'm now going to take you through a tip that's perhaps not as complex and is perhaps a kind of panic button if anyone out there is struggling with budget, but also needs to make sure that they have that sustained visibility. So something that we have found that is working is very much thought leadership. Now, it's the oldest trick in the book. Like, it's not innovative in that sense. However, in a world where our marketing spend is reduced, it means that we have to think effectively, and we have to think what a brand can bring to a title to secure links. And one of those key things is expertise. So we do this with a lot of our clients. We build out thought leadership angles, looking at key issues within their industry, and we'll work with key trade titles to place senior people from their side in those titles. They then offer us back links in response to that expertise. Now, no, this is not going to be a strategy that you can use forever, because you will need to come out with more exciting stuff. However, if you hit an area such as a second wave, this is a great way to continue that visibility and make sure that you do have tangible results that you can share back with those key stakeholders. And then the next one is very much around effective press releases. I have kind of alluded to this already, but the key thing for us is really good press releases that very much have those key headlines within them. So for a brand for a title like Stylist, who might be looking at key issues within their demographic, say it would be finance planning for somebody who is looking at furlough, then you could potentially look at the Google Trends on their site and make sure, not on their site, wider, and make sure that your stories pitch directly to what your audience is searching for, which means that you can tailor those articles and make sure that they do spot your emails within there. However, the thing to remember is that making sure that your quality of links is consistent is really important. So as well as having effective press releases, you also need to look at effective targeting to make sure that you don't have links coming in from less favorable DAs. So how do we measure it? The key thing for us here is really consulting with conviction and making sure that you do secure targets that are realistic and will set a good relationship up for a long amount of time. The key thing with digital PR is that it's not a quick fix, it's a long, long road to a good result. So these are a few pointers that we have when setting realistic goals. The first one is around DA. So DA of 70 plus is usually a national. So if you want to have lots of DA of 70 plus, that's an interesting point, because if you want a press office that is valid and is securing coverage for your key people, then you might not want to always be asking titles like The Telegraph, who have a DA of 70 plus, for a link, because they will simply start to turn off from your emails. Instead, what we do is look for DA sites that are around 40, and they won't happen every week, but it means that you can build those relationships and make sure that you do leave the nationals in some ways alone, to make sure that when you have a campaign that has a big reason to link, you can push for that. Always factor in regional targets. So remember that those key titles can syndicate far and wide. And just like PR, press association is still a massive winner. However, you're not going to get it every month. So make sure that when you do look for your link targets, you're realistic in terms of, this is how much we would get on a standard month. And then we might have a month where we have more activity in our campaign, so we can ramp that up. There are lots of nuances. Oh, sorry, Seb.
There's a few people wondering about DA, so let me just give a quick intro. So for people that aren't SEO types, DA means domain authority. It is a number that you don't really have to worry about where it comes from, but it measures how many other websites link to a website. So if 100 is the max domain authority, which no one has, but someone like the BBC might have a domain authority of 95, for example, which is one of the highest in the world. Wikipedia, again, something that everyone links to, has a domain authority of 94, and it kind of goes down like that. And you have big newspapers in the UK or in the 70s and 80s. A big price comparison website like USwitch might be in the 70s. And then it goes down, regionals 50s, big blogs are 40s, 30s. And basically, if you get a link from a high DA website, it is worth gold dust, because then Google sees that a high domain authority is linked to you, therefore your domain authority goes up, right? And so all you need is a few high domain authority links. And like, I'm talking, as a new brand, if you got links from a few national newspapers, like that would take your search results from nowhere into page 1, most likely. Like, so like high domain authority links are gold dust. If you're someone like Trussle, who's been around for a while, we've already got a lot of high domain authority links. And so you're now going after ones that you haven't had already, so that kind of makes the challenge even harder, that you have to target who you're going after. So there you go. That's a brief intro to domain authority.
Thanks, Seb. And just to build on Seb's note, it's really around making sure that you ask when you think there's a valid reason and a good chance of getting a link. So making sure that you really read the room. So titles such as The Express can link, The Mirror maybe, Mail Online, if you have a case study, I would say you've got a good chance. And then these change. So before this week, I would say Metro can be yes or no, depending on it. Probably before this week, less likely to secure one, but then this week we've got 2. So I think it's really key that your team really tracks this, and also you make sure that your whole team is tracking this. So the account executives on your team are probably out there more than you if you are leading a team, but then at the same time, if you do have a level agnostic approach to a new sell-in, you can make sure that all of your members of your team are really in tune with which titles will link, what won't link, and when to ask and when not to push. So key metrics for us are really around combining SEO metrics and PR metrics, and also making sure that you have always on metrics, so metrics you look at all the time, and then campaign specific metrics as well. So from an SEO perspective, you can very much look at number of links. So a lot of our accounts will have, we want this many links per month. And that is a really valid stat, but you should also make sure that you look at the quality of those links as well, and look at the average DA. Seb, I know you wanted to touch on Google Rank and campaign specific ones as well, and you had mentioned that on the last one. Do you want to touch on that again?
Yeah, I think we'll get onto it a bit later with the tools that you're going to suggest as well. But just enough to say that the ultimate goal is to get traffic to your website or your brand. And so really the ultimate goal is, when someone Googles for remortgage or buy a car or, whatever topic you're trying to win, did the page go up? And like there's, as you go into SEO, there's a very, if you're number 1 on a search result page, you get 20% of the clicks. If you're number 2, you get 10% of the clicks. If you're number 3, you get 5% of the clicks. And so, if you're starting down at 8th or 9th and you're getting 1% of the clicks, moving up 2 or 3 places is a huge increase in organic traffic. So that's why you look at the Google rank on big campaigns, because that's really what you're trying to move ultimately.
Yeah. Completely. And the other thing that we always build into our metrics are the PR side of it as well. So we are constantly fascinated by share of voice in terms of your share of voice versus your key competitors. One thing at Threepipe that we're doing at the moment is trying to build a tool that will equate the how far share of voice impacts, if it impacts, and what exactly it does to your page rank. But share of voice is a really useful tool, particularly in times like these, because it makes sure that you can see against your competitors, are you tracking all right? Because if you only look at yourselves, then you might just be shouting into a void. Whereas if you look at your key competitors and you see, okay, this week, this happened, and we were on this much of the media, it's quite a useful tool in terms of comparison. The next one's keyword mentions. This is very much a traditional metric that you can use for volume of coverage using tools like Kantar, Cision. You can say, I've had this many pieces of coverage this month, but you should also look at it in terms of depth of coverage. So you may have 100 pieces of coverage, but they might only be a centimetre large. Instead of having 5 key pieces of coverage, which are a whole page, really in depth, singing your brand proposition, making sure that you do really balance that will, in essence, create a useful digital press office. And then these are a few tools that we use basically every day. We have Ahrefs. We also have Cision. We have built an internal dashboard as well, which pulls all these things together. We never undervalue the value of Cision. It's quite a traditional tool, but it has got quite an advanced dashboard system within it that continues to innovate, making it quite useful. Another key thing to use is Moz. All of our team has Moz embedded on their toolbar. This is a really funky tool that basically tells you the DA. The reason why it's useful to make sure that your whole team knows the DA of sites is because it educates them as they sell in, meaning that you can make sure that everyone's across it. And if, say, a reactive opportunity comes in from a high DA, they value that over a reactive opportunity from a low DA title. Yeah. So, in summary, I've done a list because I know that webinars like to end with a list, and lots of people like lists like me, but essentially an effective press office is both traditional and digital. PR is still PR. It's just the metrics we use and also the tools that we use are more skewed towards SEO these days. A capability is not a story, it's an advert. Make sure that you really have that conversation throughout to ensure that you're realistic with your results. Set realistic, achievable goals. And also make sure that you flip your campaigns again and again to make sure that you don't just hammer the same press release. It doesn't work anymore. Build useful tools and reuse useful tools. That's something that we do all the time. You don't just have to have a brand new campaign, brand new tool. Make sure that you do use your tools in other things. Measure before you target, measure when you land, keep measuring, not just against yourself, but also audit your competitors. Make sure that you know where they're linking, make sure you know where they're not linking, and you can use tools like Ahrefs to do that, and ask when you know there's a chance. Don't ask when there isn't a chance, because otherwise you could appear on a really angry Twitter feed from a journalist, which is not where anyone wants to be. So that, in summary, is our list. Now I'll hand over to Jack, who's going to take us through question time. I'll stop sharing.
Jess, Seb, thank you so much. Some really insightful takeaways there. I'm sure there's a lot of brands who can take some of those and start using them straight away. But getting into some of the questions, I've got a few drafted here. And then if anyone has any, please just drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We'll try and get through as many as possible. So starting with Seb, and we're going to start with a rather broad question, but in your opinion, what's the most effective way to increase traffic to your site?
The key question that everyone wants. So there are many ways to grow traffic to our websites. It really depends on your purpose, what kind of traffic you're trying to get, what your brand is, what vertical you're in. Like, there are so many ways, and obviously I would encourage you to hire some kind of growth consultant who may be able to give you a more complete answer to this question. But like, in short, so 3 basic ways to do it. Get a tool like Ahrefs, so the PR team use it, but also for SEO and content strategy, Ahrefs. There are multiple tools that do it, but Ahrefs is superb. It very quickly lets you find out which terms people are searching for, how many people are searching for those terms, and most importantly, the competition for those terms. So, for example, you may want to get remortgage traffic, but when you see that there are 50 people, banks, price comparison websites, mortgage brokers, all competing for remortgage, you might decide, oh, I have no chance of getting remortgage without spending a lot of time and money on something. So my main advice would be, look for high volume and low competition keywords, write a lot of content, and try and keep it aligned to your business if possible, so that when the traffic does come in, at least you can try and convert it. But there are many ways to do it. You could do it via social media. You can do it through all sorts of means, depending on what your business is. So yeah, if you have a more specific kind of question, I would happily answer it, but it's hard to answer the generic.
Of course, that's great. Just drawing one of the points you said there, social media, maybe a question for Jess. What would you say is the role of social media when it comes to the marketing process?
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer it in terms of digital PR, what we use it for, and then I can answer it more widely. For us, social media is both an information source and a shop window. So we go on social media, and if we think there's a brand insight there, we'll make sure that we really mine into it, look at what your competitors are talking about on social media, look at the reactions as well. That's a really key thing in terms of, it's not just the content that you and your competitors are pumping out, it's also the nuggets of information you get in the comments that can really help with a brand proposition. The other thing is the shop window. So a lot of our campaigns, arguably the most successful campaigns, really do integrate all of their marketing streams. So we'll make sure that we use it both in an awareness sense, so editorial social, which we previously would call it organic social. It really is very much posting something, putting a small amount of boost behind it to make sure it beats the algorithm, but then using it as that shop window where people can discuss it. And then you've got paid social. So we also use that to make sure that we have a transactional element to our campaign. So for me, social media is very much information and shop window, and it really continues to be that. It's a bit like a media cycle. You need to keep on top of it to make sure you can use all of it as effectively as possible.
That's great. And Seb, moving on to links, question here, would you advise paying for links? And if so, which vertical would you prioritize?
Ooh, another age-old SEO question. So I ultimately, everything you do to get links is going to cost you time or money in some way. It's going to cost you an amazing PR agency. It's going to cost you a team of content writers. It's going to cost you paid social budget. It's going to cost you, there are so many ways to spend money. When people say buying links, what you're actually doing is you're buying essentially content marketers to go out and place your links on other websites, which is kind of what you're paying a digital PR company to also do, right? So that they're all very similar slices of ways of doing it. And again, it really just comes down to what your brand is and your approach. Digital PR works for us because, we're also a brand and we're trying to have share of voice in various conversations. But if you're a basic e-commerce outfit who just wants to rank high for a certain product, then being more targeted and just getting a few links placed in various blogs is probably the right way to go. So yeah, just be aware that it's all going to cost you time and money. There are no free ways to do this. It's just whichever way works right for your company, and obviously avoid anything that would likely get banned from Google. So if you're going to buy links, do it in a respectful way. There are ways of doing it correctly. Yeah.
I was going to say, avoiding being banned by Google will obviously be a bit of a bonus. But just on to the next question for Jess. What type of content would you say proves most effective in gaining links in coverage?
Yeah. So firstly, I think it really depends on your brand and the campaign. For us, we've had really good success with the calculator, obviously, but I think the reason why it worked so well at that particular moment was because it was a moment where the nation was under financial stress, looking for options in terms of how can I alleviate this pressure. Calculators do work really well across the board, but so do maps. The key thing with a map is to make sure that it is dynamic, so people can look on it, but it's also to make sure that regional titles can make it very specific to their area. And if you can, make it as granular as possible, because we all know what it's like when you call, say, the Birmingham Mail and they say, okay, yeah, sure, that's actually not the area of Birmingham that we covered. Do you have something more granular? And if you can say yes, then that will really increase the success of your tool. Lists work well in terms of a trade title. So I would say that if you're going to go down a thought leadership route, that type of content will work there. But then when it comes to consumer titles and kind of the links that you really, really want, I think calculators and maps work well. And there are tools like Infogram, and Seb can say a lot more about exactly how all those tools work, but you can do it in a cost-effective way by using tools like that.
That's great. And just picking up on some of the questions coming in now, got a question here. What is the value of company mentions in online articles when they don't include or won't include links?
Let me take
I suppose more traditional PR, I suppose.
No, so I think if I'm reading this right, Kiara, is Google has said before that they still give you some value if they mention your brand but don't link to you. So this was a couple of years ago. I think Google confirmed that this is the case. It's obviously very, very hard to measure because you don't ever see the link. From what I've heard, it does work. Like if you get a mention in a big newspaper, even though you don't get a link, there is some value to it. But links are still very, very important. So yeah, if you're going for the brand mention route, you probably need to do it on a big scale. Like you need to get lots of mentions from people. Maybe influencers is the right way to go there. There is something there about sentiment analysis. So Google does, it doesn't officially use things like Reddit and Twitter and Instagram, but if I was Google, I would be looking at those places for, the sentiment around things. And so, if there's a ton of people talking about a topic on Reddit, I've seen anecdotally enough times over the last 20 years to see that there are bumps from that kind of thing on organic traffic. And even then, even if it's not directly ranking, so there's a side effect there, right? Where journalists, they use Reddit, for example, right? And so if they see an interesting topic on Reddit, they may write a story about it, right? So there's all sorts of ways of slicing it. But links are easy to measure. They're easy to see the impact of. And so, yeah, we often come back to links.
That's great. A few more questions coming in now. Here we are. When it comes to UK newspaper publications, are there any ones in particular you find that journalists are more receptive to answer or provide coverage and links?
I can take this one. I don't think there's an easy answer to this, sadly, but I do think there are nuances. So I think the more tabloidy side of newspapers can take links more readily, particularly because they like a softer story slightly. So places like the Express and the Mirror will sometimes take links if you can really offer them something valuable. And I think the answer that you get from a newspaper is always going to be different because it really depends on the validity of the reason to ask. So if you do have a really useful tool that can really help their audience, that is linked to an issue that their audience is facing, I would say that yes, they probably would offer one, but it would have to be a really good collaborative conversation and you would have to phrase it politely. You can't just say, hey, I've seen this topic and it includes my brand, please can I have a link? It has to be much more in depth than that. I think you will always have those fluky links that appear in places like the Telegraph, the Guardian, and that's brilliant. And I think the fact that they choose to associate themselves with your brand and include that link is wonderful. But arguably, I think you really have to look back at your content and why you're asking for a link. And as I said, Metro flip-flops between the two. So it really depends. It also depends on if one of your competitors has a brand partnership with that title, that's probably going to limit your reason to ask and also what you're going to get back. So I think it's really about stalking in terms of yes or no, without sounding like a widow.
Excellent. And an interesting one for Seb here. Have you ever seen any PR campaigns backfire spectacularly and cause a negative impact on SEO visibility?
I can give you one really great example because it's quite famous in SEO circles. I can't name names though, because it's too bad. There was once a PR campaign that was completely fabricated. It was about, I can't tell you, but it involved teenagers and it involves them doing something. And it was an incredibly salacious headline. It was so grabbable. It got picked up by a ton of newspapers, hundreds of links. The site that pushed it, went way up in the rankings. And this traffic was really valuable to them. They were in quite a valuable sector. And it turned out the story was completely fake. They'd made it just to get a ton of backlinks. And Google blacklisted them. And this site used to get somewhere around 70% of their traffic from Google, so on the high end. And it went down to 5-10% overnight. and the company had to let go of a large number of people because they were no longer making any money. And yeah, it took them somewhere, I think, around 2 years to fully recover from that. It was kind of a steady climb. And eventually you kind of had to put a petition into Google to say, look, we've cleaned up our acts. I'm sorry. Can you please unblacklist us? And yeah, they bounced back. And today they're doing fine. But yeah, that was definitely a dark patch from the SEO team. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So a real horror story there. A good question here from Raquel. How do you measure the SEO value of a link, organic traffic and revenue of a link besides from referral traffic and revenue it can bring?
Yeah. Okay, so the cost of a link is somewhere between, from a decent website, is somewhere between £300 and £500, right? So if you're buying links through the content marketing route that I mentioned, and you want a DA 40 or 50 website, it's somewhere around £300 to £500, right? So that first gives you a ballpark. Like if you're going to your boss and saying, I want to build a bunch of links to my website, it's going to cost me 10 grand. You know, that kind of gives you the cost. So the value is harder. But again, tools like Ahrefs and your own things like Google Search Console and Google Analytics, you know, again, if we take our Remo calculator, I know I can look at my data and tell you how many remortgage customers we've had because of that calculator, right? And it's hundreds of customers from that calculator. And I know the value of a customer, therefore I know the value that that calculator has driven. And I can tell you absolutely that it has driven more value than it cost us to build that calculator. So it is measurable, but obviously you have to have some idea of what the business value is for your business. So what are you trying to sell? You know, if it's just the blog posts and it has no measurable value or low measurable value, then it's much harder to do that. Yeah.
That's great. Interesting. Perhaps one for Jess here. What is the best way to accurately measure share of voice?
Yeah. So we at the moment use Cision mainly. The way that it looks at that is it will look at the whole industry that you are tied to. So you would allocate your key competitors, say you had 5. It would measure the mentions of those 5 competitors, including you, and then it would create a percentage that you are owning at that particular moment of those media titles. The key thing to remember is that it does shift quite quickly and that tracking it is really important. We are building a tool that's going to look at the brand mentions, but also the impact in that industry within the newspaper. So it will also tell us kind of brand agnostic mentions and whether they have a brand within them as well. But mainly we use Cision to do that. I know there are other tools that you can use. Brandwatch is brilliant for it. Brandwatch also ties it to sentiment. And it looks at the fact that you may have this large percentage of your share of voice versus your competitor. The sentiment difference is this, but our main one that we use is Cision.
Right. And another follow-up question actually for Jess from something we were talking about earlier. Which platforms do you use or do you find are best contacting journalists and engaging them? Is it Twitter, is it Reddit, or is it more traditional means via email or picking up telephone?
I think given the nature of everybody working from home, it really varies per journalist. We do still use the phone a lot. We don't necessarily go direct to mobile because unless you know the journalist, it can be a little bit too much. The same goes for Twitter. If a journalist request comes out on Twitter, we'll respond to it usually from our Threepipe Twitter. And also if, say, I had a really good journalist contact with somebody at Mail Online, I might go to them via Twitter as long as I actually know them. I know that journalists get really annoyed if PRs kind of can't get hold of you on email, so I'm coming to your Twitter. That doesn't work in the real world, nor does it really work if you're in the journalist world. But the key thing for us really is email. I think email has really had a resurgence. I think mass send outs arguably don't probably work, but making sure that you do build those relationships and continue to foster them on email has been our largest use in the pandemic, and phones in terms of news desks in the morning, they're invaluable. But I would say more traditional forms, we don't necessarily go via platforms like Reddit. They're good for trends, and Twitter's good for personal relationships, but more traditional forms are working at the moment this week.
Excellent. So we're just going to do two more final ones, one for Seb. Here we are. Top tips for building, top tips for link building SEO agencies that don't take loads of time and money.
Just get rich quick, yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there is no quick and easy way to do this, right? So look, Google is the source of traffic. It's free. Millions of companies rely on Google for traffic, right? And there are plenty of examples like the one I gave earlier where, Google de-ranks your website and suddenly your business is completely untenable and you have to fold. Facebook has done it before as well. I don't know if you guys remember, but like Facebook used to drive traffic to like sites like Lad Bible, and there were like dozens of Facebook aggregator websites. They turned them down and they folded. So in short, it's hyper competitive. Everyone wants this Google traffic. And yeah, there's no easy way to get around it. Like, you have to put a lot of time into it. You have to put a lot of effort into it. You can hopefully do it with just time and effort and not money. So like, if you are a content writer or a content writer, like, that's step one. But it's, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, you're looking for, if possible, low competition keywords. Like, they are the key. Like, that is your chance of getting onto page one and getting some search traffic. So use a tool like Ahrefs. One other way can be following trends. So you can use tools like BuzzSumo and Twitter and other tools to find trends. And you can fast follow stories with some good content. That can work. Google likes to show recent relevant content. So if there's a topic that's trending, maybe you're one of the first few people to write an article about it. That can be quite good. If it's a really good article with like really deep content, you might even get some links. You might get a journalist that sees it because they're looking for that story at that point in time because it's breaking. That works quite well. You can tailor your content towards things that are not Google. So things like Reddit, things like Twitter, things like Instagram, things that you're not necessarily competing with so many people. I don't know how popular it is today. I'm a bit out of tune, but like, for a long time, crafting content for Reddit was a big thing. Just because if you went viral on Reddit, that would again trigger the journalists, the other content, the social media. It was kind of a tipping point type thing. But it is not easy. You need to do a lot of research, use a lot of tools, put a lot of time into it. Yeah, sorry, no easy way on this one.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing about the trends and finding news hooks. I think obviously it's so relevant, so important for digital PR, but traditional PR as well. So reliant. But just one more question for Jess, and slightly controversial one. Should a company invest more in advertising or PR?
Thanks, Jack. That's a lovely question. I think the key thing is really where your brand is. So are you a brand that is looking to target a key consumer issue that is in the media? I would argue that press relations is probably really useful there. Advertising, if you're looking for quick transactional campaigns, if you are wanting to go down a paid social route, are really valid. But as a true marketeer at an integrated agency, Jack, I'd say both. But primarily, I would say it really depends on where your brand is and really looking at the need that you have and the value you can add to the consumer. If it is that you are going after a social issue and you really are looking at a key way to help consumers, then I would say PR.
Brilliant. Well, Seb, Jess, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you both. And I was going to say, I'm sorry if we didn't get through all of the questions. We've had tons coming through, but please do drop us a note if we can help in any way with your digital PR or any of your marketing, do drop us a note. Very happy to help in any way we can. But that's all for today. Thank you both very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.